Hi, my name is Olivia, and welcome back to my channel. Today I wanted to talk about 8 tropes that I cannot stand within the thriller genre. I talk about thrillers quite a bit on my channel, as well as over on my book blog, because it's one of my favorite and most frequently read genres. Having read my fair share of thrillers, I've started to pick up on a few very repetitive themes and tropes that get under my skin and very, very quickly detract from my overall impressions, thoughts, and rating of a book. I've identified 8 of these tropes that are specific to the thriller genre. So without further ado, let's get straight into some of the things that I am sick and tired of reading about. In no particular order, the first trope that I wanted to address is identical twins appearing within the narrative, particularly when they serve as the source of the mystery or twist in the thriller. As a reader, not being able to tell 2 twins apart within a book has been historically very frustrating for me, and not in the positive, building suspense type of way. To put it simply, this trope grew very old very fast, and it's still surprisingly prevalent within the genre. It's been written to death. It's no longer new and interesting, if it ever could have been classified as interesting, and I would be ecstatic if I never stumbled across this trope again. Nothing about this type of plot setup is truly thrilling, and it leaves me feeling cheated out of a well-developed and well-thought-out plot twist. Twists are one of the most important components that I look for in a thriller. Disappointing twists amidst an otherwise fantastic novel are exactly that. Disappointing and, in my eyes, deserving of a low rating. To put this into perspective, I haven't enjoyed a single thriller that I've read that features this trope as one of the primary components of the narrative or the mysterious, shocking aspects. Number 2 on my list is characters that are immediately identified as morally black or white from the outset of the book, making it abundantly clear which of these characters you're supposed to support and side with throughout the novel, as well as those that you're supposed to hate and criticize. People are flawed and multidimensional, and I want this to be reflected in the characters that I'm reading about. I don't want the author to sit there and outline all of the heroes and villains throughout the work, and nor should they have to. Their writing should be able to stand for itself and enable readers to make that decision for themselves. This also sets up the main character to be this perfect protagonist that can do no wrong, and I absolutely cannot stand this setup. These types of characters are incredibly shallow and about as unrealistic as it gets when it comes to thrillers. Instead, I want to read about characters who make some questionable decisions, ones that I really have to think about and pick apart to see, can I rationalize this? Do I agree? Would I have done the same thing? I'm intelligent enough to be able to pose these questions and come to some conclusions on my own, without the author holding my hand and dragging me down the path that he or she wants me to take. Part of the beauty of a well-written thriller is that characters aren't always as they appear, and you often find out additional information later on in the book that can change your perspective on some of these individuals. Hidden pasts and old buried mistakes that begin to resurface can be a very useful method for dramatically shifting your audience's perspective of a character, as well as rendering the thriller more lifelike and realistic. As someone who frequently reads the genre, I want to be constantly torn between loving and hating the protagonist of a certain book. I don't want to be spoon-fed a one-sided opinion from the author that character A is an absolutely horrible individual because of X, Y, and Z, whereas character B is an upstanding model citizen that should immediately garner my respect and admiration. This is one of the quickest ways for a thriller to crash and burn for me, and it's usually very, very apparent even from page 1. While we're on the topic of characters, the third trope that I wanted to talk about is the main character who knows more than the reader, constantly referencing this piece of information and dangling it right in front of readers' faces, without ever elaborating as to what the information actually is. For whatever reason, this seems particularly prevalent in thrillers where the main character has some dark secret in their past, and the author is banking on you not being able to figure this out until the end of the book. This comes across as a lazy, half-hearted attempt to build suspense and keep readers interested and engaged in the tale. There are so many other ways to more effectively build suspense without relentlessly taunting and mocking your audience with the "I know something you don't" mentality from your protagonist. This trope also tends to make books drag quite a bit, which is not something that you should be aiming for within the thriller genre. As readers progress through the book, there's no sense of satisfaction that they're picking up on additional clues or learning additional details and information along the way. As the narrative's unfolding, you feel like you're getting nowhere in trying to figure out what's going wrong or what's about to happen next. And oftentimes, none of your questions get answered until the final chapter or final few pages of the book. If I'm constantly yawning and struggling to keep my eyes open while reading a thriller, because I do generally read right before I go to bed, there's a problem, and this trope is very frequently the root of that problem. Constantly reminding readers of some big secret that's being held over their heads is a recipe for disaster, as well as a complete nightmare when it comes to the book's pacing or lack thereof. The fourth trope that I wanted to discuss is an excessively prevalent romance. There's a time and a place for romantic relationships to be the focal point of literature, and that's not within the thriller genre. I intentionally don't read romance books because they bore me to tears, and I have absolutely no interest in picking them up. Consequently, I don't want the thriller novels that I'm reading to have a romance-oriented identity crisis mid-book. I'm fine with the brief mention of relationships in passing, but I don't want to be reading steamy scene after steamy scene in a book that's supposed to keep me perched on the edge of my seat, nervously sweating and heart pounding, waiting for the next twist or turn. I expect thrillers to be chilling, creepy, and thought-provoking, rather than cute and endearing. Romantic scenes very quickly kill the mood and the overall tone of the book for me, immediately dragging me out of the story as a result. Authors walk a very fine line once they begin to incorporate these romance-esque scenes and plot points into their thrillers. And I've yet to find an author who can successfully pull this off and juggle the two very different genres in one book. Therefore, I think I'm safe to say, as a blanket statement, that I prefer my thrillers without a romantic component or a very, very heavy emphasis on romantic relationships. From past experience, I've only found these romance subplots and storylines to be frustrating, and they don't really add much substance to the book itself. Consequently, they come across as fluff and filler, merely inserted to lengthen the book, rather than add any significant details or information that could set up for a twist later down the line. On a very similar note, the fifth trope that I can't stand is romanticizing abusive relationships. Abuse is an incredibly common theme within the genre, and if handled and portrayed appropriately, it can make for a very compelling and downright terrifying read. Books that are able to successfully pull this off make a point of highlighting the negative and damaging aspects of these relationships. Works that fail to accurately represent these abusive relationships and their long-term ramifications come across as insensitive and ignorant. These poorly written abusive relationships reflect horribly on the author, making them appear unwilling to conduct even basic research to investigate some of the physical, mental, and emotional consequences of being within an abusive relationship. Abusive relationships should never be something that's glorified within literature, and authors who do so immediately lose my respect. This trope is becoming concerningly common within domestic thrillers, which really took off after the publicity of Gone Girl. The increasing number of abusive relationships within the genre has emphasized how truly difficult it is to portray the interactions between the involved parties in the relationship. There are very few thrillers that are able to do so well and provide a compelling and useful commentary on some of these relationships and their aftermath, which has made this trope a fairly large red flag for me. Moving on, another of my least favorite tropes is setting up a very, very interesting scene in the first 30 pages of the book, doing absolutely nothing for the next 300 pages, and then haphazardly flinging an eventful twist at readers in the final 10 pages of the book. Thrillers, just like a book from any other genre, need substance. If I had only wanted to read 20 pages of actual compelling plot and character development, I would have picked up a short story, not a novel. Several hundred pages of unnecessary nonsense is a tried and true method for me to quickly lose interest in whatever plot might have existed at the beginning of the book. This usually leads me to some combination of DNFing the book, wishing painful deaths on each and every one of the characters, and falling asleep promptly within 30 seconds of cracking open the book. I don't think that it's too much to ask that authors exclude all of the fluff from their narratives. instead focusing their attention on crafting compelling scenes, laden with twists and turns that keep me anxiously on the edge of my seat, waiting with bated breath to see what's going to happen next. My takeaway from a thriller shouldn't be boredom. If it is, the book has failed miserably and has most likely earned itself a spot on some of my least favorite reads of that calendar year. Continuing on to the next trope, I have no patience when it comes to reading dream after dream after dream within a thriller. The first mention of a dream sequence within a thriller immediately makes me cringe, and I've rarely found that these sequences work in the book's favor. 99% of the time, these scenes have no real purpose within the book as a whole, and they could have been excluded altogether without losing any of the dramatic effect or suspense. These scenes read purely as fluff to me, and they're aggravatingly easy to identify. It's gotten to the point that I begin to associate these dream sequences with filler that was added after the fact to add some additional length without compromising the rest of the storyline. All in all, I'm very hesitant and skeptical of the portrayal of dreams within the thriller genre. And more, I'm starting to skip these scenes altogether when I'm reading. As a primarily plot-driven reader, I would much rather follow some of the main characters as they embark on some big adventure that's supposed to get my heart pounding as I'm anxiously trying to figure out what's going to happen to them and what's going to unfold next. Listening to them recount some very strange, abnormal, distorted dreams has not held my interest in the past, and I'm doubtful that it will do so in future books that I pick up. I don't understand the overall appeal of these dream sequences, and I often find them very jarring when they're interspersed in some of the more action-heavy plot points throughout the book. The final trope that I wanted to talk about is in relation to some of the concluding twists that often wrap up these thriller novels. More specifically, I can't stand endings that I never in a million years could have predicted or seen coming. These conclusions come completely out of the blue, and readers were never given enough information to be able to piece together all of these facts themselves. Personally, these endings read as a cheap, half-hearted attempt by the author to prove that they knew more than the readers did at any given moment throughout the book, and they use that to their advantage to completely shock everyone. For me, part of the appeal of thrillers is the guesswork that's involved, as you're trying to fit all of the information together and come up with some of your own predictions as to where the narrative is headed. I love to piece together clues and create my own theories as I'm reading, and I always get a kick out of seeing how far off my predictions are from where the narrative actually goes. If no useful hints are revealed throughout the narrative, I stand no chance of correctly pinning down the ending. And this takes quite a bit of fun out of the genre. While I don't enjoy endings that are blatantly obvious and take little to no thought on my part to figure them out, the opposite extreme is equally as damaging for my personal opinions and rating of a book. A very large part of my ratings for thrillers rests on the ending of the book and how everything is wrapped up. What types of questions are answered? What type of twist or turn is introduced? How are all of the character conflicts resolved? Those are all really important things that I specifically seek out when I'm considering my rating. If the author throws all caution to the wind and writes an unbelievably obscure ending that doesn't align with any of the information that had been previously revealed, my rating instantaneously plummets. A mediocre or even decent introduction and middle portion of the book aren't enough to salvage a lackluster ending that leaves me feeling disappointed and cheated. I search for that light bulb moment in thrillers, in which all of the puzzle pieces magically fall into place, and you can then track how events transitioned from point A to point B. The movement from one point to another should have been something that the average reader could have predicted, foreseen, or even considered as they were reading the book before they reached that final twist. And that wraps up some of my 8 least favorite tropes within the thriller genre. Let me know in the comments down below some of the tropes that you're tired of reading about in the genre. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.